Hi, Spencer. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. I really appreciate it, particularly because it's Memorial Day.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, you're based in Toronto?
I am, yeah.
That's a lovely city. It has a big gay scene, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we have like an entire street called the Village that is like our queer community.
Well, so Spencer, first of all, it's such a pleasure meeting you. So you just have a book which I was lucky enough to read that came out, but it's not your first book, it's your second book, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. This is my second book. My first book was more of like a biography written for like a youth audience. So this is more for as I've grown up and have more of an adult audience now.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was reading it, it's really a self-help book.
Hmm.
Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, it's so weird. There's this like strange thing around like some people are like, oh, we hate self help. Some people like nonfiction. I don't have a preference. Like, yeah, the hope is that I can share a bit of my story and what I've learned. And then what I've done, as you know, is at the end of every chapter, I've provided some questions and exercises and key concepts for people to think about because I didn't want this book to just be about me. I wanted there to be a purpose behind it and for people to use it as a guide in their own lives. So yeah, it's self help or nonfiction or whatever term people feel most comfortable with. I don't have a preference, truthfully.
I saw a video of you this week, like going to a bookstore. So when you go to a bookstore, where do you find your book? In the self-help section or in the gay non-fiction section?
I mean, hopefully both, truthfully, but I think it's probably going to be in the nonfiction section. There's a queer bookstore here in Toronto that I love called Glad Day Bookshop, which I actually just had my book lunch at recently, and they keep it under like the nonfiction section.
Well, I jumped into asking you where your book was located, but then before that, maybe we should introduce yourself. I found your story fascinating. Just the fact that you were born in Wyoming was fascinating to me because I think you're the first person I ever met that was born in Wyoming. But then, I think another aspect is that your legs were amputated when you were a child, and then you came out later on in life. Do you mind giving us the maybe the overview of your very strange life story?
Of course. Yeah, so I was born and raised in the state of Wyoming in the United States, and I live in Toronto, Canada now, where I've lived for 20 years. But when I was born, they realized that I had a disability, and I was born with a genetic disease called sacroiligenesis, which caused the muscles of my legs not to work. So I had two surgeries. The first was at the age of 2. They amputated my legs just below my knee, with the idea that maybe I would be able to use prosthetic legs and still walk on my legs. But then we realized that wasn't going to work out. So then at the age of 5, they amputated him just below my pelvis, which is what you see now. And so I navigate the world walking on my hands and also using a wheelchair. I probably use a wheelchair most of the time and will walk on my hands at home or other small situations. But that's sort of how I navigate the world and sort of how I acquired my disability.
But then you came out.
I did.
So you were also gay, which must have been I love the way you're describing it in the book because you kind of said I didn't really realize I was gay until I realized it, right? That when you were a child, you didn't really know you were gay. Well, me, I would if I would receive a clothing catalog, I would directly go to the underwear section, the male underwear section when I was 5. So I was a bit surprised when I read your book that basically you didn't really know until pretty late in life.
Yeah, I had like a lot of clues throughout the way, but I growing up in Wyoming and in the United States at the time, in the 80s and 90s, as you know, like queer culture was very different. It wasn't prominent. We didn't see it on TV. And if we did, it was like a blatant, very a stereotype, of the funny neighbor or the funny hairdresser or the funny florist. It wasn't ever like real life. And I remember the first sort of time I realized that it wasn't an option is, I was probably 10 or 11, and my friend and I were going through like one of those like celebrity magazines, like Tiger Beat, it's called in the United States. And there was like a picture of a heartthrob man at the time that was like our age. And she was like, oh, he's cute. And I went to say,
Yeah,
oh, he is.
I actually Googled that guy. I didn't even know. It's kind of a
Yeah,
it's kind of a tragic story, I have to say.
it is. Yeah, it was, his name was Jonathan Brandis, and he was like the it actor at the time, and then later died by suicide. But yeah, so I went to say yes, like he is cute, and she was like, "Oh, but you're a boy. Boys don't think that." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess boys don't think that then." And so that's kind of just what I believed. And I wasn't raised that like gay people were bad or anything, but I just there was never an example of like this is okay, this is an option for you. So then when I got to college, um, this was like one of my the second chapter in the book, which was really important to me, is to tell my coming out story because you know my book is called Breaking Free, and this was really the first time where I found that I broke free on my own, where I realized that I was gay, and I had a best friend who came out first, and then he sort of paved the way for me. And then I came out to him first, which was so great, and he was like such a great support, and still is a great support of my life. And then I immediately told my parents. I went to like my first Pride, and then I came home and called my mom and was like, "Listen, I'm gay." And she was supportive, but initially she was like, "Oh, but you always said," because people would ask me all the time, and she said, "Oh, but you always said that you weren't," and I was like, "Yeah, because I didn't know it was an option." And then I was afraid to tell my dad because growing up, my dad had said some very inappropriate things to me, and I realized later it was because he didn't know how to ask me if I was gay. And he's like a very, very heterosexual man. He likes to hunt and fish and all the things. And so I told my mom that she could tell my dad. And then on Father's Day, which in the United States is like the second or third weekend in June, um, I called him, and before I could say anything, he said, "Listen, you're my son, and I love you, and it doesn't matter that you're gay. I just want to know when you're going to adopt me grandkids. That's all I care about."
Yeah, I
So,
remember that.
yeah, so it was
Um,
this. It was a beautiful sort of. I got very lucky that everyone was supportive.
well, I love that. You know, one question I had for you is that, you know, it's interesting because in the book, and I want to talk about it, you took, you know, this idea of the trap and talking about, you know, feeling of jealousy towards your best friend that maybe was getting his life together before you did. But you don't really come across as someone that has any self-pity. And so, you know, being disabled could trigger some feeling of self-pity. And then, you know, talking for myself, when I first came out, I had feelings of self-pity, like life is not going to be what I was expecting, and
Mm.
is self-pity a feeling you do not experience a lot?
Um, No, and I think it's for two reasons. I think, you know, because I acquired my disability at birth, this is all I've ever known. So it's not like I had legs and then they worked and then suddenly they were taken away, you know, like somebody who might acquire a disability later in life. So this like having my legs amputated made my life so much easier. It made getting around easier. It made navigating the world easier. Like for me in that way, there's lots of external barriers that exist that prevent me from fully showing up in society, but that doesn't elicit like self-pity, you know what I mean? And I think when I came out too, it was like, oh, I did the thing, like I came out and now sort of my life can begin. The only time that I would say I would maybe feel a bit of that is when I was trying to date, like as a queer disabled person. Dating was so challenging. I feel like, you know, in our community in general, unless you don't fit a specific body type, dating can be very challenging. And not only do I not fit a specific body type, but I also like don't have any legs. And so, you know, for a long time I found dating really, really challenging. And I think that's probably the only area where every now and then I'd be like, why this is so hard for me, like why is this happening to me? You know, I came out, everything was supposed to be better now, and it didn't get better for a long time, you know. So I think that's probably the only area where I really felt that.
And well, you know, I love that, but you do talk a little bit about having a feeling of jealousy at a point in your life, which I think a lot of young people experience, in which you're like, okay, well, is it what there is? I love this moment where you say, you know, you're a receptionist in a hair salon,
Hmm.
and you say, well, maybe I should be grateful. Maybe after all, a lot of people would think I have it good. And you're like, you know, am I entitled to wish for more, right? And that also, you know, you talk about having this feeling of of jealousy towards your best friend because he's kind of on a trajectory. You don't feel you're on a trajectory, and so you kind of call that the trap. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that, and why you feel it was not just a rite of passage, but you felt you were stuck?
Yeah. Yeah. So to give a quick context, I had graduated from college with a degree in communication. And, I chased the North American dream of this idea that you go to college, you get a degree, and then that will allow you to go get a really good job and you'll make lots of money and then all your dreams will come true. So I did that. And then I came out into the world and like no one cared that I had a degree. I ended up working retail and then eventually found a job, as you said, answering phones at a salon and spa, which, I eventually climbed the corporate ladder and became one of their client operations directors. But on the outside, I had everything that the world told me that I should want or need. But on the inside, I was feeling angry that like my dreams didn't come true. I'm stuck in this job, but it's making me a decent amount of money. So I stayed. I just stayed. And it was a trap of my own making. This idea that like I stayed because the money was good, not because I enjoyed it or it's what I wanted to do with my life. And I was watching my best friend who I was living with at the time. This is the same friend that I came out to. Um, he was like all of his dreams were coming true. He was like taking interior design and he was figuring out where his life was going to go and he got this like amazing job and I was so jealous that like he was able to do all of those things. And so I was just stuck in this trap of my own design, which we all can find ourselves in. It may not be a job, it could be a relationship or a city that you live in. But for me, what helped me is watching him. He started taking these interior design classes, and I thought, well, maybe I could go back to school too. I always loved theater. I studied theater in school. So I started taking some theater classes, and that's where the joy came back in my life. And it gave me the self-confidence to think, well, maybe I could want more. Maybe I could ask for more. Maybe I could search for more. Maybe I didn't have to stay in this trap that I'd created for myself. Maybe I could break free of that and find something else, find some more joy in my life and in my career. So that's sort of what the trap is, and that's sort of how I started to get out of it.
And so now you're a motivational speaker, you're an author. How do you make a living? And what is how would you describe where your career took you?
Yeah, so I would say my full-time job is a motivational speaker. People hire me to come speak at their conferences or whatever, and I have multiple topics on motivation or the importance of hiring folks with disabilities or the importance of hiring queer folks. Um, and then I'm also an author and then a content creator. So I would say those are my sort of three revenue streams: is a motivational speaker, content creator, and then as an author. Um, and I became a motivational speaker because around this time when I was working at the salon, a friend who knew I was struggling invited me to go on a volunteer trip to Kenya to work for this. He had been volunteering with this non-for-profit based here in Canada. And initially I was like, I'm not going to do that. But then as I thought about it, I thought if I'm ever going to break free of this trap that I'm in, I need to like figure out who I am somewhere else. So I went to Kenya, and it was a life changing experience. And the moment that changed
That's
every.
when you climb the Mount Kilimanjaro, or is that another trip?
Oh, that's after. Yeah, that's after.
Okay, okay.
I spent a lot of time in East Africa. But this first trip, I got to share my story with some of the local kids as we were visiting a school. And a young girl said to me she didn't know that something like this, meaning the loss of my legs, could also happen to white people too. And that was the first time where I realized, maybe there's something to my story that I've missed. Before, my disability was just something that happened to me. It wasn't something that I was interested in exploring in any way. And when this girl said this to me, I thought, well, maybe I've missed something. Maybe I can use my story not as a way to like inspire people to make them feel better about their lives, but to inspire people to make a difference on something that they care about. And so that's how I became a motivational speaker. I came home and quit my job in the United States and moved to Canada to work for this non for profit, which I worked there for almost 12 years. I've since moved on and started my own business, but that's how I became a speaker. And that's why I became a speaker initially. And then that's what led to Kilimanjaro, which I'm happy to talk about if that's the direction we want to go in.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, that's kind of that's interesting because that's first of all, it's a pretty fascinating journey, right? But then it seems sometimes that it's a little bit the anchor of your story. It's like the person that climbed the Kilimanjaro while not having legs. Well, could you let us know a little bit how this had happened and where the idea came from?
Sure. What was so interesting is that I was working for them for 4 or 5 years and traveling the world and being very successful. And I released my first book. But that was a bit challenging for me because they didn't want me to talk about my sexual orientation publicly. They were fine with me to be gay as an employee, but um, they didn't want me to talk about it publicly because they had a lot of conservative donors and so I was feeling a bit frustrated about that. Um, but for all intents and purposes, I had everything and I was very successful. And I was starting to feel guilty. A, that I wasn't living authentically, and B, that here I was telling all these people to make a difference in the world when I was just talking about it and I'd never actually done it myself. And also, I was traveling 200 days out of the year, so I wasn't getting time with my friends or family, and I was in another trap. I was in this trap of my passion of like, this is my passion, but there's no purpose to it. And now it's becoming self-serving. And I didn't want that to be the case. So my boss had said, have you ever climbed Kilimanjaro? Because he'd recently done it. And I was like, no. I'm like, I have no desire to climb a mountain. Like I don't like camping. I don't like any like all those things sound terrible to me. But then a week later I thought, hmm, maybe I could try to climb Kilimanjaro and maybe I could have a really cool adventure with my two best friends. And then maybe what we could do is we could create a campaign around it. Because at the time, East Africa was facing one of the largest droughts they'd seen in over 60 years. And, not only was I speaking throughout the year, but we also ran volunteer trips. So every summer, I was living in East Africa for 3 to 6 weeks, hosting volunteer trips with young people and businesses and corporations. So I wanted to give back to this community that helped me find my heart and my passion. I thought, okay, this is how I can get out of this trap is if I can create some purpose to it. I think that will lead me to where I need to go. And so that's what we did. We campaigned for an entire year. Our goal was again $500,000 for clean water. And then June of 2012, after training with a personal trainer and finding a guide, we set out to climb Kilimanjaro. And the first day I was hoping that I was going to do half on my hands and half in my wheelchair, but that wasn't the case. I was having to walk most of it on my hands. And so I'm really grateful that my best friend said that they would come with me because they were great at supporting me both physically and emotionally the first half. And then what was wild is the last day when we were going to summit and get to the top, my buddies got altitude sickness and I didn't. And so then they needed my help. And although I couldn't carry them physically, emotionally, I could do it. And by just walking with them on my hands, slowly hand over hand, we made it to the top. And we'd raised well over our goal, which ended up providing clean water to 12,500 people for life. So that's sort of how Kilimanjaro came about and what we did and what that experience was like.
You talk about climbing 80%, I think, on your hands.
Mhm.
Is that what happened? So you have very strong biceps.
I did at the time. I don't know if they're as strong now, but I did at the time because we worked with a personal trainer for a year, focusing on my shoulders, my biceps, my elbows, just and my back muscles to support my shoulders, so my body could sustain what we were hoping to do.
So, I told you earlier that I'm a bit of a one-trick pony, and I write a lot about LGBT issues. And when I'm listening to you, a lot of it is about overcoming differences, right? And also the idea that people maybe living with disability or people that are gay can do things that maybe they are told they cannot do, right? And it's this idea of like maybe our contribution to the world, right? And
Hmm.
and acknowledging that there is a wide variety of human
Hmm.
experience and that there is value
Hmm.
in it. The current zeitgeist, particularly in the United States, is a little bit the opposite, right? Which is, let's focus on people that are the most able. Let's focus on people that are part of the norm, right? And how are you navigating the fact that maybe your message is a little bit at odd with the current zeitgeist in business, as an example?
Yeah, I think that's why I wanted to include being queer so that's why it was so important to me because of the time that we're living in. You know what I mean? I want to be able to be a voice and be a potential light in what feels like a pretty heavy darkness right now, specifically for the queer and disability community. When we're looking at the policies that are coming out and the administration trying to get rid of DEI all across the United States, and all the things that we know. I wanted to be that person, be like, no, we actually have a lot to contribute. You're going to miss out on a lot. And I wanted to be another face in the crowd, to be, because I think back to when I was, 16, 17, 18, 19. I would have loved to have had other examples of queer disabled people, that showed me life is possible and that success can be possible. It's going to be hard, and we're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to lean into the community. But I wanted to show that and offer that, and show folks, like, you can try to erase us all you want, but I raised $500,000 for clean water. This queer disabled person, you know what I mean? So the hope is that other people will see themselves, and depending on their situation, be able to be that example in their own community as well. And the other thing that was important to me is, I remember when I came out as gay, people were like, "Oh my God, disabled people are queer?" And it was like, yes, like, disabled people want the same human experience as everyone else. Lots of disabled people want love and sex and a partner and potential marriage and kids and all of those things. So that's the other reason why I wanted to include both of my identities in this story, is to not only, be the example, continue to be, as you know, our lives have always been built in protest. Simply just daring to exist as queer people is a protest and a revolution, specifically in a time like this. So to be able to put that story out there, regardless, felt important, and to give people a fuller picture of what many disabled people want and need in the world.
Earlier you spoke about maybe your disappointment when you started dating, right, as a gay man.
Mhm.
And, I'll tell you something that, I am on Instagram, but I tend to disable accounts that only show abdominals because it makes me feel bad,
Yeah,
about my age, and it makes me feel bad sometimes, about
totally.
my physical shape. Uh, you know, do you feel that it is part of the gay experience, right? Specifically gay men, that body types is extremely important and that it seems to be central to the culture. And how did you navigate your difference in that area, right? How did you come at peace with maybe the culture of the gay world compared to your aspiration for yourself and your aspiration for romantic love? How did you reconcile the two after the maybe the initial disappointment?
Yeah, I mean, what I began to realize is, I didn't think, as I mentioned earlier, it was like I came out, I did the thing. I thought like all my dreams were going to come true, and I would find my dream husband, and everything would be so easy. And then once again, it wasn't, because I didn't think my disability would matter. And then when I started to realize it did, and although I had, although I had photos in my dating profile that I was clearly disabled, not everyone was picking up on it. And so then it felt like I was like having to come out a second time in the queer community, like, oh, by the way, I have a disability. And people would block me, people would get angry, people would be upset. And then what I discovered is I needed to just say it very clear and very plain, and show very clear photos on my dating profile. So then that weeded out any of the men that wasn't interested, or that were going to be very rude or inappropriate. Um, and that helped. That really did help to, by just saying it plain in my profile. I used to say, because then I would always get questions about my body. So my dating profile used to say something like, no, your eyes aren't deceiving you. I don't have any legs. And although I don't like camping, I can still pitch a tent. So that way, like, everyone knew, like, yes, although I'm a gay man, I don't have legs. Like, I'm interested in physical and emotional love, and all of those things. And, and that started to change things. The other thing that I had to do, is I started to go to therapy for a completely different topic. I was starting to have panic attacks at work. And then in therapy, I really started to understand why dating was feeling so difficult for me. Not only because of, the tropes and the stereotypes in our community, but also because I was looking for someone else to tell me that I was worthy of love. because I didn't think I deserved it, because that's the message that I kept getting from the queer community. And even to this day, queers, a lot of queer spaces are not accessible. They're not wheelchair friendly. They don't have accessible bathrooms. Um, but it was through therapy that I realized, oh, I have to be okay with me. I'm not going to get that from anyone else. And so I did a lot of really intense therapy to really learn to love not only myself as a queer disabled person, but my body and what my body looks like and how my body works. And once I got to a point where I was like, if I never find love, I'm actually okay. Like, I really like who I am. I really like the community of queer people and non-queer people that I'm surrounded by. And when I got to that place, that's when I met my partner. And we've been together we just celebrated our fourth anniversary just a few weeks ago. Um, so yeah, but that was my experience. It was really tumultuous, and there was a lot that I had a lot of anger. And then I had a lot to work
When
through.
would you say that? When would you say that was? Like a long time ago, or like 10 years ago, or more recently than that?
I would say I met my partner when I turned 41, and I'm 45 now. So I would say I spent a lot of my 30s um, angry and frustrated and exploring how to navigate all of this. And then it was like my mid to late 30s, early 40s that I started to do some intense therapy. And I would say it wasn't until I met my partner 4 years ago, just like months before, where I was like, you know what? I'm awesome. I like all of this. I like what's happening here. And if people aren't into it, that's all right. That's on them. That's not on me. And maybe I'll eventually find someone who is interested in me. And then I met my partner. So yeah, I would say just within the last 5, 6 years.
So you're a very good therapist.
I did. I do. She's great. Yeah.
And then another question I will have for you is uh, do you feel that spirituality plays a part in this? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the book that you were raised Catholic, right? And that, in fact, it made it somewhat harder to come out. Do you feel that that spirituality is a part of your life, and are there ways you found spirituality, even though the Catholic Church might not always have been the most welcoming?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other thing where I've struggled to figure out where I land with that. Because I was raised Catholic and there was such a negative connotation to being queer and what that meant for me and what that meant for my life. And so that didn't work. And what I've come to realize only in the last, I would say, year is that organized spirituality or religion isn't for me. Whatever I need and want, I have to figure out for myself on my own outside of sort of an institution. So I'm still navigating what that looks like. I do have a bit of a ritual practice that I do with meditation in the morning and some other things that work for me for now. But yeah, I think a lot of queer people can struggle with figuring out like what does spirituality mean and where do we belong when so much of the rhetoric and the dogma, specifically when we look at the United States, is used as a tool against us and to keep us out and to make us feel terrible and all the things. So yeah, it's an ongoing journey for me.
Well, what I love about your story and the story of the book is this idea that you evolve a lot as
Hmm.
as the years go by, and you evolve in your career, but you also evolve as a person. And now
Hmm.
what you just shared, that your relationship to what you can hope for, your romantic life, has also evolved over time. And so, do you think that you are going to continue to evolve as you age?
I hope so. I feel like the older I get, the more I question, the more I want to know, the more I want to better myself. And this is kind of, without being too much of a spoiler at the end of the book, is kind of what I say. It's like we're constantly breaking free. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't end. And I think if we really want to I think if we really want to be like a global citizen of the world, we should always want to better ourselves in some way. You know what I mean? And be constantly searching for what more can I do for myself? What more can I do for the world? And so that's kind of how I feel. I always think of, I can't do the direct quote, but Nelson Mandela in his book, A Long Walk to Freedom, talks about how, he climbs sort of a large mountain and he gets to the top and he says something along the lines of, I top and I get to the top and I look at the view, but I rest only for a moment knowing that like there's more questions to ask and more mountains to climb. And so I sort of think that I think we can always be bettering ourselves and figuring out how do we help other people's lives be better as well at the same time. So yeah, I think we're always breaking free and always evolving if we're open to it.
So the book came out recently. Were you happy with the way it was received, and did you feel that the message is coming across?
Yeah, it's only been out currently for a week tomorrow. So it's hard to tell. But for me, um, I sort of let go of the idea of like, oh, I want to make the New York Times bestseller list and all these things. What I wanted for me is like, I just hope it resonates with folks. And I hope the right people find it and it helps the right folks who are in the same situation that I was either now in their life or in their 20s when there was no roadmap for my life didn't turn out and no one said this is what you do. And so I wanted to write this book for those folks that were in the same scenario to be like, this is what I did. It might not fully work for you, but at least here's an example of something that someone else did to figure out how to get to the other side of whatever that thing is that you're looking to break free from. So that's what I'm focusing on. I just want it to get to the right people, and if it comes to success, great, even better. But if not, I think the message is the most important part.
Well, and I feel, what I love about it is that there is a message for fitting in the world, but there's also a message about fitting in the gay community, right? And that
Mhm.
sometimes it's true that the diversity of the gay community doesn't always come across, right? And
Mhm.
there is a gigantic diversity.
Mhm.
And to be like, okay, well, you can find your path despite what you would see on Instagram. There are so
That's
many
right.
different ways to live as a gay person, and there are so many different paths to happiness as a gay person. So I really love this. So you came to New York a few weeks ago, and I don't know if Monique told you, but I am on the board of Housing Work. So I was really happy
Yeah.
that it was launched at Housing Work. That's a place I love. So did you feel you get a nice welcome for the New Yorkers? Unfortunately, I was out of town, but did you find that the New Yorker gave you a nice welcome?
I did, and you know what? It was. I'm so grateful that Housing Works allowed us to do it there because I didn't want it to just do it at any bookstore. You know what I mean? It's really important to me that we continue to show up for the community. So yeah, it was awesome. And you know what? The coolest part was is we got there and there was a shopper in the bookstore who was also a wheelchair user, and he had just wheeled by the bookstore. He was traveling from out of town and thought, oh, this looks like a cool bookstore. So he came in and then I came in and he came up to me and he was like, I can't believe you're here. He was like, I know who you are. I follow you on social media. I watch your videos on YouTube. And he was like, the fact that you're another queer disabled person is so amazing. And I was like, oh, I'm actually like, I wrote a book and I'm here to launch it today. And he was like, oh my gosh. And he stayed to like um, be there for the launch. And for me, it was like, oh, this is why we did it today. It was for this person so we could meet. And he was traveling the United States by himself as a wheelchair user, which I just thought was so cool. So yeah, Housing Works was not only a really special place and an institution, as you know, for the queer community and specifically for folks with AIDS, uh, but it really was like a beautiful full circle moment, as I was mentioning earlier. Like, oh, I'm reaching the right people.
And so you are going to do other stops in your book tour, or are you that was it, and you're not going to do more than that?
Yeah, that was kind of it. We did a launch in New York and then a launch here in Toronto last week, actually with pop icon Nelly Furtado, who's a friend. She came and hosted the event
Oh,
with me.
nice.
Yeah, and we did it at the Glad Day Bookshop here, which is the oldest queer bookstore in the world. So we launched the book there yesterday. So now I'm just going to go back to social media and continuing to use that. And then what we've also done is we're starting to do a book club with my book, where we're just doing the sort of the first round of it starting in 2 weeks where the book is meant to be self-guided, but sometimes people need a little bit of support with that. So we're going to go chapter by chapter in the book with a group of folks and
Well,
lead
I
them through
love
some
it
of the questions.
because I have to tell you, when I was reading it, and I was reading the first set of questions,
Hmm.
some of those questions in the first set are, well, what were your hopes,
Yeah,
when you were younger, and can you get back in touch? I was like, wow, that can be a little intense to like be like, okay, well, how is my life faring to what compared to what I had in mind, and I
totally.
love that. I think, I love the fact that I feel that the book is ambitious, right? The book is telling
Mm.
you, you should be ambitious.
Yeah,
in what your life looks like. And so I love the idea of a book club around it, because probably for some people it's like, okay, well, I would love to do this with other people because it can be a bit challenging.
totally, exactly. And we want it to be ambitious, but to the point people are comfortable with. Maybe the ambition is to just try something new for the first time in their life. You know what I mean? It may not be blow up their relationship or get a new job, but yeah, that the idea of the questions are to get people thinking differently, and maybe questioning like, what more could I want?
So look, my interrogatoire is coming to an end, and I'm going to give you back your freedom. But I had one question for you, which is, long form is difficult to write, and you wrote a pretty big book. You wrote two pretty big books. So what is is this something that was easily accessible to you, writing in long form, and how long did it take you to complete the entire project?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking the question. Yeah, listen, I can write, and I do enjoy it, but I knew that I couldn't. Both books, I knew that I couldn't write them on my own, especially when you're telling your own story. You know what I mean? That feels too. I don't know, something uncomfortable about it for me. So both books I've written in tandem with a co-author. So this book, my latest book, I wrote with this incredible man named Blake Dvorak, who was so helpful at helping me put together how I wanted things to go and what I sort of wanted to look like and the stories that I wanted to include. And he was very helpful, like, you tell a story and you think, oh, this is a good story. And he'd be like, oh, I don't know. And then you tell something that maybe you don't think is a good story. And he's like, oh my God, I love that story. So it was like really helpful to have someone to do that. I work so much better in collaboration than independently. So for me, that was very helpful to have a co-author. So the book took us about 2 years from start to finish of like, from
Oh,
the
wow.
idea to the proposal and then to write the book. We started writing the book last January and had a final manuscript by June, and then the final manuscript that was now that everyone's reading was at the end of 2025. So yeah, it took us about 2 years altogether.
Oh, wow, so that's a long process.
Hmm.
Well, look, I'm really grateful you took the time. I think, for my audience, it's going to be wonderful because I talk a lot about LGBT people in business. And so, getting an opportunity to talk also about how, the diversity of the community, how one fits in the community, but also breaking free, right? This idea that, I loved what you talked about earlier, which is that conversation with your therapist about what can I hope for, right, in terms of romantic love and where do I start, which is by loving oneself. I think that's really powerful. In my little interrogatoire, do you think there's anything I forgot that we should talk about before we close?
No, no, I think you've covered it all. You were great, and it's so nice to be talk to other queer people. You know what I mean, and just to have that dialogue, I think is really nice. So I just appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Spencer. And as a reminder, the book is available on Amazon and I think every good bookstore, either in the
Correct.
self-help or in the gay nonfiction section, which is Breaking Free. And thank you so much, Spencer. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.